I am gently, patiently, and with dedication introducing you to the phenomenological approach. In the first class, I argued for the fortuitousness and discontinuity of thought. The history of Western philosophy is not a linear process, not a progression towards an accumulated understanding of the world, but indeed a bric-a-brac. It is a diversity of different conceptual approaches of the world we live in, a patchwork. This insight in the fortuitousness, the accidentality of thinking, leads us to the more fundamental realization that the world is not the sum of objects or the totality of objects. The world is what appears in our encounters within different horizons and contexts. That is what happens. Heidegger calls this the worlding of the world, or the worldliness of the world. I'll come back to this in another class. Our encounter with the world is always an existential encounter, revealing different dimensions which cannot be added up to some total sum. I have called this the fullness of contingent unconcealment, and we will address it in the classes of different phenomenologists. The second class, we elaborated on the works of Kierkegaard as an early approach to phenomenology. Kierkegaard addresses the importance of restrained irony as a philosophical strategy. Although he pays tribute to Socratic irony, which stirs up all self-indulgence of the establishment, Kierkegaard urges us to understand that Socratic irony neglects the finite and fragile concreteness of individual existence. Socrates is in his irony indifferent towards the contingency of the world. He prefers, and he seeks even, ultimate refuge in the world of eternal ideas. Now, the same goes for what Kierkegaard calls romantic or aesthetic irony, which is in fact another form of escapism. The world is now reduced to play and poetic experiment, indifferent to the true perils and the real challenges of life. According to Kierkegaard, only restrained irony acknowledges the possibilities and the finitude of human existence. Most radically, the phenomena possibility and finitude are explored in a famous book of Kierkegaard called The Concept of Dread, or the concept of anxiety, or the concept of angst. These words mean the same. Dread, anxiety, and angst, they mean the same. Now notice, anxiety or dread is not really a concept. It's the title of the book, The Concept of Dread. But this is typically Kierkegaard's humor. He calls the book The Concept of Dread because Hegel wants to capture everything in concepts, and philosophy loves to capture everything in concepts. But dread is not a concept. Dread is the overwhelming experience that takes life beyond the confinements of conceptual thinking and touches upon existence as possibility as such. When you experience anxiety, dread, you're completely in despair. You have no hold on anything anymore. So concepts won't save you. Here you are without knowing what is happening to you. And it is of great importance, and I already mentioned it, to acknowledge the difference between fear and dread. Fear always has an object. In fear, there is something which makes us afraid. We fear for our lives. We are afraid of an illness, of an upcoming catastrophe, or a stranger in the night possibly carrying a knife. That is fear. Angst, anxiety, dread, has no object. There is nothing but dread itself. Dread engulfs us, tumbles us over. It momentarily confronts us with nothingness. And exactly because there is nothing, no thing, no object to focus on, we are confronted with possibility as such. So not this possibility and that possibility to choose from. We experience possibility as such. So, and to learn, I quote from the primary text, to learn rightly to be in dread is, according to Kierkegaard, the most important thing. Because dread is the adventure of the possible. It is the dizziness of freedom. So real, true freedom is an experience of dizziness. It's also an almost dangerous experience because you don't at all know what to do with this adventure of the possible. We don't like this. We rather be in fear than in dread. Everybody prefers fear to dread. In America, you have these strange people, I don't know if you know, have ever heard about them, the doomsday preppers. Wonderful people. I think I feel pity for them, but I also admire them. These are people who think that the world is coming to an end. Something terrible is going to happen, and all they do, and they work day and night in some old mine shaft or some secret place that they've built where they can survive for a couple of weeks or months, not really realizing what they're going to do after these 3 weeks or months. The doomsday preppers. It's better to be afraid than to be in dread. Everybody who watches horror movies knows this. It's somehow, I still don't know why, I can't watch them. To watch a horror movie is fun because it's only about fear. It's not about dread. And this is what really life is all about. Because what does this adventure of the possible mean? There's a remarkable argument by Jean-Paul Sartre, and we will address it and thoroughly discuss it maybe next week. We are not what we are, and we are what we are not. Sartre also liked to play with Hegelian kinds of formulations. So what could he mean with this? It sounds ridiculous, it sounds stupid, although if you remember these words rightly, you may at some party impress everybody there. They won't understand what you're saying, and then you can explain to them what I'm going to explain to you now. No, maybe you're going to explain it to me. Why are we not what we are? Why? Because we could become something else. We are not what we are because we will become something, someone in the future, a different person and with different traits, different perspectives, different attitudes. So we are not what we are, and we are what we are not. Because in a strange but deeply true sense, we are what we could be. And most of you, I hope, will realize this. This is one of the most important things to realize. We are what we are not. You may become different people. You may get rid of some of the ideas and feelings that suffocate you right now, or maybe make you an impossible person in the eyes of others. We are not what we are, and we are what we are not. So the adventure of the possible is indeed the heaviest of all categories. Existence is as such a constant challenge, a constant possibility. It is a lifelong project. This is what Heidegger means when he says, technically speaking in philosophical terms, the essence, my essence, lies in my existence. I will have to reinvent myself again and again, all through my life.
Welcome back to First Philosophy. I'm Sonia Schwitz.
I'm Kas Sonia.
And immediately we're being faced with a wonderful question. Why are we who we
Yeah.
Why are we not what we are? A difficult one indeed.
Very difficult one. And also, Awee gives the first steps towards an answer. But it is a very good question to work out yourself. Like, not take Awee's explanation and immediately believe, okay, I'm done here. This is where you have to start working. Like, envision if someone would press you to answer this question. How would you answer this yourself?
This is a rather important question, I think, throughout philosophy, and I'm personally happy that Sartre posited it. But I know there are varying opinions present in the room.
We did have a production meeting, yes. Now, the full quote from which the question comes is, we are not what we are, and we are what we are not.
Yeah.
Which, like, Awee talks about this sentence for a bit, but I think this is a sentiment that goes back to Nietzsche, who wrote in The Gay Science, we have to become what we are. What I think that is a more elegant way of framing this question, because we have to become what we are, it always implies movement.
Right.
And what Sartre is doing, as I think he often does, is like copying it and trying to make it his own and make it less good, maybe.
Right.
But I think we are not what we are, and we are what we are not. Like, it is a nice sentence, but it is also a sentence to sound impressive.
Right. I see what you say, that it's kind of, this phrasing is devoid from the potentiality that is there in Nietzsche. I recognize this is more static.
Yes.
But one might argue there is also something good in it, because, that is the way we think about identity, whether it is a productive or unproductive way. And I don't know, Sartre, just reformulate it. You don't have to like it. Nobody has to like it, but it's good that it exists.
It is, and we talked about this in preparing for this episode.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the question of originality, because you will see a lot of things throughout this entire podcast series. You will see similar lines of thought pop up, and Awee kind of gives a chronological order mostly, so you will see what people do with the previous thinker and how they relate to previous thinkers. And there is always this question, like, what is an original thought? Like, it doesn't matter if you take something from someone else. And I mean, this is where I always get stuck with Sartre. Like, I'm not saying everything should be original, but if you take something from someone else, make it better. Like, make it more interesting. And this is personal. This is very subjective. I don't like what Sartre is doing with a lot of the things he's taking from Dostoevsky, but to poke the bear.
Now I'm getting angry.
Now you're getting angry. With Dostoevsky, with Heidegger, with Husserl, with Nietzsche. I'm not a fan. But that tangent aside, that personal preference aside.
Sure. You don't like public philosophers.
I don't like public philosophers.
Fair enough.
I think we should delve into the episode.
Absolutely. Back to our non-public philosophy.
We're doing public philosophy, yeah. So all personal preferences aside, I think it's time to delve into the episode itself.
And start moving this time towards Husserl.
As discussed in class, Kierkegaard has articulated 3 dimensions of life as a project, 3 spheres, tentatively but perhaps also misleadingly depicted as stages on life's way. The aesthetic sphere was stage, the ethical stage was sphere, and the religious stage was sphere. And indeed, one of the books by Kierkegaard, a pseudonymous book, is called Stages on Life's Way, but it is written by one of Kierkegaard's pseudonyms. So it's just one perspective on how these spheres interact. Some critics have argued, however, that Kierkegaard follows Hegel's dialectics here. In spite of his fervent critique of Hegel as a systematic philosopher, Kierkegaard is also a systematic philosopher. One may indeed argue, I do not. One may indeed argue that the aesthetic stage is a primitive stage. The only question asked here is, the sole project is how to enhance my life, how to become successful, how to be amused, how to be distracted, how to avoid boredom. That is what the aesthetic lifestyle is all about. What can I do? What is possible for me to attain? There's some hidden despair in this, Kierkegaard tells us. There's some hidden despair. Is that all there is? Constantly looking for the nicer things in life, or the most pleasurable things in life. Is that all there is? Now, the ethical sphere or stage is opposed to the aesthetical sphere, and it is governed by the question, what must I do? Not what can I do, but what must I do? Note, not in the Kantian sense, what must I do, the categorical imperative, or obeying the law, or finding duties that I must fulfill. That's not it. To Kierkegaard, the ethical stage, the ethical sphere, is the sphere of true despair. Not hidden despair, true despair. The true despair, the true existential doubt, so to speak, to find the truth that I'm willing to live and die for. The aesthetic person will also want truth to live for, but not to die for. That at least is a fundamental difference. And for the ethical person, there, in Kierkegaard's sense, there is no fixed answer. But still, then there is the religious sphere, the religious existence, which is really the heaviest of all categories, where possibility and infinity come together. So apparently, the religious stage is, according to Kierkegaard, the ultimate stage. So either or becomes a neither nor, because this involves infinity within finite existence. This is true existing. Here, you might say, we are embracing existence to the full, in the leap of faith. So it's not religion A, where you find solace or social life in church. Kierkegaard is very degrading about that. I wouldn't that much. But this is not what religion is about. Religion is not finding solace or finding some stability in your life. No, religion B, is realizing that you are on the brink of a leap towards faith and living as a contemporary of Christ, realizing that you may decide, it's more a leap than a decision, to love, entirely love and be dedicated to everything and everyone. Now, phenomenologically speaking, it suffices to say that Kierkegaard has described three crucial possible spheres of existence. This is my position. The extreme fulfillment of existence in the religious sphere does not make the aesthetic sphere into something despicable, mediocre, or abject, and something to be loathed. And the ethical sphere is not an incomplete sphere compared to the religious sphere. Again, phenomenologically speaking, these are three different possible projects, spheres, in which we may exist and perhaps always exist, oscillating between the three. Now, in Edmund Husserl's terms, and Husserl is the hero of today, these are explorations, what Kierkegaard does, of the life world, the Lebenswelt. I'll come to that concept. The Lebenswelt, the life world, a crucial concept in Husserl. So the idiom of the three spheres are just ways of articulating what the life world, the Lebenswelt, is all about. But there's a more important thing to say about Husserl, and this will be a difficult class. I hope rewarding, but it's going to be difficult. I'm really going to challenge you. Because we come today to a remarkable project. Edmund Husserl is attempting to acknowledge the contingency of unconcealment, but at the same time, he wants to offer a philosophy that provides us with absolute certainties and absolute foundations that were sought for but never found in traditional metaphysics. Over 2,000 years, we have tried to find absolute foundations and absolute certainties. We never found them, and Husserl said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. This appears to be an impossible and even outdated endeavor. After Nietzsche's proclamation of the death of God, which is in fact the death of all philosophical absolute truth, the true world, how can we, realizing the fortuitousness of thought, surmount the accidentality of philosophical positions? It may and has been argued that the history of philosophy is a discontinuous succession of ontologies. An ontology is a theory about being. But there is, and I should have been more honest about it, but we can do some nuances here, there is also a remarkable tendency within this discontinuous history, and that is the tendency to find not an ontology, but an ontotheology. The idiom is of Martin Heidegger, which means theon is the word for God. So the ontologies that Western philosophers, the most important Western philosophers have developed, the ontologies, the theories about the being of the world, are in fact ontotheologies, because they are looking for, not for being, ontology, they are looking for the supreme being, the highest being. In Plato, the world of ideas. In Aristotle, the unmoved mover. In Descartes, the ego cogito, which is the fundamentum absolutum inconcusum, an undoubtable, absolutely certain foundation of everything. And in Hegel, of course, there is this absolute spirit, the unfolding of the absolute spirit in history, which is the supreme being, ontotheology. And we got rid of this. This shop is closed. Everybody said since Nietzsche, we say this shop is closed. But Edmund Husserl, born in 1856 and died in 1938, but he believed that he could develop a philosophy which is not metaphysics, which is not looking for a supreme being, but indeed offers absolute certainties, all these certainties that metaphysics has aimed at in vain. So it's going to be quite a thriller today, an adventure, to see if Husserl succeeds. I quote from the summary of the first class where Heidegger writes, "Phenomenology expresses a maxim that can be formulated to the things themselves." It's a bit of an odd translation. The German has "zu den Sachen selbst," which means we have to go to that which really, really matters. And Heidegger alludes, it is opposed to all free-floating constructions, metaphysical theories, and accidental findings, science. It is also opposed to taking over concepts only seemingly demonstrated, and likewise to pseudo-questions, which are often spread abroad as problems for generations. Phenomenology means to let what shows itself be seen from itself just as it shows itself from itself. So this is a very, it sounds like a bit modest, but a very courageous attempt to really tell the world what shows itself. And Husserl is trying to show us that what shows itself can indeed be articulated in a philosophy which is about absolute truth.
So, a philosophy that is about absolute truths or absolute certainties might sound a bit counterintuitive to what we have been saying for the past few episodes.
Yeah, caught red-handed.
Caught red-handed. However, this is not about big truths and big certainties. This is not about finding the answer for the universe. This is not about finding what is the good.
Mm-hmm.
This is about trying to find what is absolutely essential in an object. And Awee will talk about this more throughout this episode and also next episode on Husserl. But like, if you talk about what is essential to a chair,
yeah,
it would become absolutely impossible to answer. And because if you would say, well, a chair has 4 legs, no, it doesn't have to.
Mm-hmm.
Well, a chair has a seat. Well, it doesn't have to, really. Like if you draw the outlines of a chair, if you make an artwork that looks like a chair, you would recognize it as a chair, even if it doesn't necessarily have a seat to sit.
Okay, I'm following.
So trying to find what is absolutely true about a chair or absolutely certain about a chair is something that is very, very difficult. And this is a project that Husserl is trying to do.
Wouldn't you say he's falling into a Platonism again? Something that in the beginning of the lectures we were trying to move away from, this sort of essence of things.
Well, there is something to that. So there is, like, if you find one of these truths in Husserl's phenomenology, that is what is called eidetic. And the word eidetic comes from the Greek eidos, which is the idea that we talked about in Plato's philosophy. However, this is not something that is out there. This is not something in another plane. It is not something that everything answers to. Mm-hmm. It is something different, but we'll come to that throughout the lectures.
Right. I mean, what Awee reiterates is that it's a grounding, right?
Exactly.
The starting point that you can rely upon. So it is just a way of making sure you're not spitting hot air and saying anything you can in the world.
And that is what this podcast series is named after. This is the first philosophy, the absolute grounding.
I love it when they do that in the movies. They reference the name of it.
We're doing it.
Yeah.
So from a first philosophy, trying to find groundings with an absolute certainty or absolute truth is not the same as what Awee just mentioned being an ontotheology, like trying to find the highest being. That is not what is at stake here, not at all. And the ontotheology, which Awee relates to Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Hegel, this might also, for someone who's not that versed in philosophy, might sound as Husserl is trying to correct previous mistakes. But I think this is something that is still done today in the way some people believe in science.
Right, making an idolatry of any particular thing. It doesn't really matter what, science in this case.
And I think rarely scientists themselves are guilty of this, but it can be the image certain people get from science. So if we understand string theory, we will understand everything. That is also a form of an ontotheology. Like, we will find the greatest form of being and then we will understand everything. But that is not true. That will not happen. According to the continental philosophers that we are discussing.
But I think also according to just what we're seeing, Awee talks about scientific miscommunication at some point, about how enclosed we become in these very ideological frameworks.
A small side note that I think we should make is that it is this part in the lecture series, and this will go on until the last episode, where a lot of technical terms start popping up. We would like to encourage every listener that hears these terms and think, what are we talking about? Do please Google this. Like, every first-year student in philosophy has a Google tab open, or any other search engine has a search engine open to look for certain terms, because philosophy uses these terms for a reason, but they can be difficult and not that accessible.
Yeah, and I would say do not feel too discouraged or intimidated by looking up the definition, really trying to figure it out, still thinking that you're missing something.
Yeah.
The truth is you probably are, but that is not a problem at all. I would say reading philosophy, and in this case listening to philosophy, is a task of perseverance, and you will be hearing words like this more. You will start recognizing the roots, and with time, because you've heard it in so many contexts, it will start falling into place, and you will develop this kind of philosophical intuition.
Yeah, and the same goes for hearing certain phrases or words in another language. Because this lecture series in the past was given in Dutch, so Awee uses some Dutch words or phrases as a reference, also for the Dutch students in the room. But he also uses a lot of the original German or the original Greek or French words or phrases. This is also something that tends to happen in philosophy. Some people just do it to look interesting, I would say, or to sound interesting. Like, not every time someone...
I agree. People overdo it sometimes.
And sometimes it sounds good, like we have already had zu den Sachen selbst,
Yeah.
which to the things themselves covers the basis, and but zu den Sachen selbst just sound amazing. So that is very easily forgiven. But in what is coming, I think, especially with Husserl and Heidegger, the original German or Greek words really convey something that gets lost in translation.
I agree with you, and I think we will see some very justifiable and justified use of German and Greek.
And Hebrew.
And Hebrew. Someone's getting excited, it's me. And I would say treat it the same way that you would treat specific philosophical terminology. Google it, try finding things out about it, and you will inevitably remember it.
Yeah. And with that, I think it's time to give the room back to Awee.
Conclude the lecture.
Conclude the lecture.
Now, let's look closer at the works of Husserl, the founding father of phenomenology. In the first decades of the 20th century, Husserl detected 4 worrisome developments in Western science, philosophy, and culture. 4 worrisome developments. First is the bankruptcy of all systematic and metaphysic philosophy. Well, that's where we are now after Nietzsche. All systems of speculative philosophy have fallen down like houses of cards. This is the situation where most philosophers today agree on. This is our situation. Nietzsche has diagnosed it. Philosophers are hanging in dreams on the back of a tiger. In the summary of the first class, there is a small fragment of Nietzsche, how the true world became a fable, how we realized that all these stories about the true world have shredded, and they're all fables. They're all, we might say, Plato, he just had Socrates have these discussions, but he just invented the world of ideas. He just made them up. He just had a nice story, and he thought, well, I'm living in a world where there's so much discussion about what is true and what is untrue, what is real, what is unreal, and he just made it up. It's a house of cards. Descartes' ego cogito, it's the result of a thought experiment. How convincing is this? There is no real certainty about the status and the content of the ego cogito. There's a nice book by Feuerbach. Feuerbach wrote a book on the essence of Christianity, das Wesen des Christentums. And this is the anthropological turn in a very nice sense. What is Feuerbach telling us? He says, if we look at Christianity, we see that all the finest qualities there are all in God. God is supreme goodness, supreme being. God is good. But, Nietzsche told us God is dead, we might also consider that God is just a projection of ours. We have invented God as the supreme, ultimate, good being, ens summum bonum. We projected it. So let's just take back what we gave away. Let's take back what we gave away and say, all these fine elements that we have projected in divinity are inventions of man, and let's realize these wonderful things on earth. You can understand that Feuerbach was of deep influence on Karl Marx. We are no longer living, this is a worrisome development according to Husserl, in a world where we have anything that we can really find solid ground in. I quote Kierkegaard again, I feel like I'm living as a poor tenant under the roof beams of an impressive building, constantly being embellished, realizing that the foundation is breaking down. Now there's a remarkable, I'm curious what you would think of this. If you ask philosophers, this started actually it was depicted in the 1990s, what is the period that philosophy is in right now? People have tried, of course, to say, what is the philosophical status of our time? And there is an idiom, and you probably know about it, but let's try to understand it today. There's an idiom that you probably have heard oftentimes, the idiom of postmodernism. Does that mean anything to you? Postmodernism? What does it mean? What is post? Let's do some thinking. What does postmodernism mean? Modernism is usually associated with which philosopher? I mentioned him. Descartes. Right, Descartes. So modernism, Descartes, really truly radical methodological doubt. Kant, thinking about Descartes, coming up with this sapere aude, dare to think. The whole Enlightenment could be depicted as modernism. Enlightenment and modernism are the same. Enlightenment and modernism mean that if you really use your brains, if you really think hard, you will find solutions for everything. And now we call this, our era, postmodernism, which means that we no longer live in modernism because of the masters of suspicion. The masters of suspicion have shown us that modernism is a bit of a dream. It's the exaggeration of the autonomous, rational subject, which doesn't really exist. And now we have found this term. The term was coined by Lyotard in 1990, I believe. Postmodernism. But what is it? So we know now a bit the content. We live in postmodernism. So we have some kind of a realization that modernism is too easy an answer for the human condition. We live in postmodernism. There is something embarrassing about the word. Yeah, you know it. You can't give the answer. What is it?
It still refers back to modernism.
Sorry, I'm an old man.
It still refers back to modernism, so it isn't like a
Yes?
new kind of philosophy. It's just saying it's not that.
Very good. We realize that we are beyond modernism. We're no longer in modernism. We're postmoderns. You find it in every article, in every newspaper. Journalists write about this all the time. None of them knowing what they're writing down. We are no longer in modernism, but we just don't know where we are now. We just don't know what we really are. We are only postmodern. Actually, I find that the most interesting thing about this. The only reason why I'm happy to be a philosopher is that I will never be asked if I would have gotten my job, and they would have said, "Welcome, Awee Prince. This is your room. Build a new system, and tell us when you're ready." I would have. This is what I like about today's situation. We don't really know where we are. We have to find out. If postmodernism is the word now, there will be in decades to come. I challenge each and every one of you to find a better word, a positive word, a word that really acknowledges where we are now. But it can't be postmodernism. It's an embarrassing definition. If I ask in the exam, what is embarrassing about the definition of our time as postmodernism, you would know the answer. So as soon as someone mentions the word postmodernism in some discussion, don't kill them, but hurt them. Second worrisome development is the development that philosophy has become Weltanschauungsphilosophie. That philosophy is becoming the development of worldviews. You see this in the 20th century. Ideologies are produced. Philosophy is no longer about metaphysics. It's no longer about this courageous search for absolute truths. It's just about developing ideologies. You have socialism, you have liberalism, there's capitalism, there's fascism. Tomorrow there are elections, and these elections are only about world views. That's all. Everything has become political. Third development is that spectacular growth of positive science. Husserl says. Worrisome development, spectacular growth. Especially physics, making philosophy less and less relevant. The big philosophical questions, this is the fourth development, 3 and 4 belong together. It's all in the summary, don't worry. So there's a spectacular growth of positive science and the tendency that all traditional philosophical questions can be solved by science. I'll give you just an innocent example. Free will. One of the most fundamental questions in philosophy is the question on free will. Does free will exist? And even in theology, the famous discussion between Erasmus and Luther was all about free will. But in all philosophical traditions, this is addressed. What is free will? And now you see books published. Free will doesn't exist. I'll give you an example. There was an experiment. There was 20 students, 10 on one side, 10 on the other side, and a very, very, very long table. And halfway the table, there was some papers that you could note. There was a salad, a very healthy salad, and a very rich chocolate cake. And all you had to do is write down your name on the paper next to the salad or next to the chocolate cake. Now, one group had to remember the number 1,346,208 and 2,223,101. And the other group had to remember the number 13. There they were. You see the ones with 13 smiling. Let's do it. The others, God, no. Do you still remember? They had to, huh? And there they went, by the table. Oh yeah, we're getting a reward after this experiment, so I have to choose. So they wrote their name and they went to the other side. Oh my God. Some had it right, some had remembered it. Now the thing is that 85%, and they repeated this test again and again, 85% of the ones that had to remember these two complex numbers went for the chocolate cake. And the other group, there was a more average idea of some people like chocolate cake, some people like salad. Again and again. So if you have to remember something very difficult, you need sugar. You need sugar, so you go for the cake. Now this is, according to the scientists who did this test, a proof free will doesn't exist. Because it's not your free will that you decide whether you want the cake or it's just because you have to remember this. You see a tendency in science at the moment. Dick Schwab is a famous author in Holland who wrote a book, Wij zijn ons brein, We Are Our Brain, in which he even explains that religion is actually something that has a genetic disposition which is rather close to schizophrenia and epilepsy, and it will make you suffer from dementia sooner than anyone else. This is in the book. You know, so if you have the leap of faith, if you have religious feelings, there's just something wrong with your brain. The meaning of life, there's a nice example. This is a nice example. You have these questionnaires for depression. Maybe sometimes you think, well, let's just fill out one of these questionnaires. You see where I'm at. So you get these questions. First question, are you sad often? Yes. Do you sleep? Are you not sleeping well? Yes. Are you hopeless about the future? Yes. Goes on. And all of a sudden there's a question, do you believe that life has a meaning? Yeah, I'm so sad, there must be a meaning in life. So I finally have a positive answer. Yes, I believe there's a meaning in life. And you don't realize that the people who made this questionnaire have made it thus that your positive, affirmative answer on the meaning of life counts negatively, which means that it is an extra confirmation of your depression. P.C. Kuiper, one of the greatest psychiatrists in the Netherlands, his biography stirred up some things, and he's not that much respected anymore, unfortunately. I liked him a lot. Once said, if I look at today's psychiatry, I have the feeling that the question for the meaning of life is a symptom of a beginning depression. This is where we are at now. If you think life has a meaning, if you're looking for the meaning of life, there's something wrong with you. And actually, we find in Wittgenstein's Tractatus Philosophicus a famous quote, which is often quoted and not quoted to the full. In the Tractatus, this is the book which is really the book for analytic philosophers, nihilistic philosophers who say, only say what you can say. And here we read, you can read it at home, it's chapter 6, proposition 52. We feel that even if all possible scientific questions be answered, the problems of life have still not been touched at all. You find this quote everywhere. So many texts of people who still want to talk about the meaning of life. They say, ooh, even Wittgenstein acknowledges this. Because if you listen to it, you would believe that he still thinks that we feel that even if all possible scientific questions be answered, the problems of life have still not been touched at all. But there's one sentence that nobody quotes, and that is, of course, there are then no questions left. And this itself is the answer. 6.5.2.1. The solution of the problem of life is seen in the vanishing of the problem. This is what Wittgenstein wrote. So all these questions about the meaning of life are useless questions, unanswerable questions. Don't ask them at all. Just look at science. Science will give the answer. Not to the question of the meaning of life, but because if all scientific questions are answered, still the question of the meaning of life is untouched, because it's useless. It's a useless question. There is no answer to the meaning of life. I would agree, there is no such a thing as the meaning of life. But there is such a thing as searching for the meaning of life, or struggling for the meaning of life, or contemplating on the meaning of life, which will not make it go away. But we have this tendency in science, the books are called, the free will doesn't exist. We are our brain. And the questionnaire on depression proves it also. If you think there's a meaning of life, there's something wrong with you. You just don't go there, don't go there. Now, it is important to note that Husserl diagnoses these developments as a crisis. He calls them a crisis. So there's no real systematic philosophy anymore. Philosophy is just making worldviews. Science is taking over. The big old philosophical questions are no longer questions of philosophy. Science will solve them. He calls this a crisis. The book is titled, a famous book written in 1936, The Crisis of European Sciences. And he describes, and the crisis is, I'll come to that later, about the meaning of life, but also about something else. This is interesting for students who also do a scientific study. Husserl describes how the different sciences tend to disperse with alienation between them as a consequence. So each science has its own field and focus of attention, its own methods, its own vocabulary, its own presuppositions. You find that. I often attended congresses where a sociologist and an econometrist could hardly speak with each other. They are in completely different worlds. We see this alienation between the sciences. This is something very, very prominent. Take economy. The economist reduces human beings to the homo economicus. If you study economy, your starting point will be not human existence as such and in the full, in all its contingency. No, human beings are defined as homo economicus. And the world is reduced to a conglomerate of commodities that may be explored and obtained. The homo economicus is someone who tries to make his life an optimum. Actually, this is very close to the aesthetic sphere of Kierkegaard, mind you. Values are immaterial commodities. Bas Jacobs is one of the professors there. He's a good friend of mine, don't worry. He once said, values are immaterial commodities. If you're a real philosopher, you just want to fall on the ground and start crying. This is terrible. Values are immaterial commodities. So life is a business, life is a career. So in economy, there's reduction. Some years ago, I was one of the founding fathers of the Erasmus University College. And together with others, we tried to build the curriculum. And there is an example from our experiment that is taught in psychology. I'm not sure whether it is still taught there. So the psychology students may correct me, because it's a terribly sexist example, but it was in the program, and I just want to read it to you to show how psychology may think. It's about an experiment. Somewhere in Canada, a 3,000 feet long and some 210 feet up in the air, a wobbly suspension bridge hangs over a mountain stream. This bridge, the Capilano Canyon Suspension Bridge, was the scene of a very elegant experiment. I'm just reading what It's still there? It's in the curriculum? Okay. Now, so we can really take this seriously. So there's an experiment on a very high bridge, wobbly, 210 feet high, where you walk over. Then, a very attractive interviewer named Gloria stood on the bridge. She asked men passing by to write a short story about a young woman in a picture. Having concluded their stories, Gloria asked the men if they would like her to explain the experiment in more detail at a later time. She then wrote her name and telephone number on the edge of a piece of paper and gave it to them. The same experiment was also conducted atop another bridge. This bridge was solid, short, and firm, much firmer and more solid than the Capilano Bridge, and hung only 10 feet over a shallow stream. Analyzing the stories, it turned out that the stories of the man atop the Capilano Bridge contained more sexual content than those written by the man on the lower bridge. Moreover, 50% of the men on the Capilano Bridge rang Gloria back for more information, while the percentage for the man on the lower bridge was no more than 13%. So it's still done. Okay, well, it's an interesting experiment. I wouldn't call it elegant, but it's an interesting experiment. How can you explain this? I would just say the answer is evolutionary. When in peril, procreate. That is, yeah, exactly. I read, it doesn't say it that way. What did they say? In love and sex, it's evolution and economics, not romance. That is the correct answer. So when in peril, procreate. On this wobbly bridge, something tells these guys, I'm going to die. Oh, there's a woman nearby. Well, it may not be Gloria, but whomever, I got to procreate, I'm dying here. And if you're on this solid bridge, you have more sense in your stupid head. Even 13% wanted to see them, dirty bastards. Probably married at home and whatever. So this is psychology. My good friend Willem Schinkel once said, in sociology, they tell me there's only structures. And as a sociologist, I see only structures. But as a person, I only see human beings. Yeah? If you take a house is very differently approached by an architect who sees the contours, the design of the house, the composition. The engineer would see its construction. The economist would see a house as a commodity, as an investment. There's nothing wrong with these views, but this is how an architect, an engineer, economist would look at it. A psychologist would look at the house. Is there a fine balance between private and public spheres? A psychiatrist would say, are there dungeons where children can be abducted and kept? The biologist wouldn't even see the house, he would only see the garden. So all these scientists have the tendency of looking at different aspects of the world. And according to Husserl, the big problem is that there's alienation and dispersion, which leads to a disintegration of the scientific world. You saw this not so long ago. We had this, we may have it again, this COVID pandemic. And you could see how different scientists could not really communicate with each other. If you would hear, and you saw them in the talking heads programs, there were people, doctors, experts in medicine, who kept on stressing we have to find a cure. They were propagating lockdowns, vaccination programs. And then there were economists who said, yeah, but we have to keep the economy running. Too bad for the old folks, we got to keep this economy running. Well, then there were psychologists who would say, yeah, but you see the loneliness and the depression and the terrible problems that people had. And for some reason, and you may blame me, there was not much word from philosophers in these days. But there was these sciences, they were not communicating. They were just confronting each other. There's dispersion and alienation.
Awee has just given us a plethora of examples of how different sciences approach same problems, the same questions. I would like to hop back on my Dostoevsky horse and return to...
Hammering the Dostoevsky anvil.
Exactly. We're all going to be sick and tired of it. But Awee talks about that experiment with the salad and cake that, purportedly is supposed to show that there is no free will, everything is determined. The way sort of philosophical literature tackles it, we can see it's a very interesting. I'm very fond of this character. His surname is Kirillov, and he is from Dostoevsky's Demons. And he is in the background most of the time. He's definitely not central to what's going on, but he's an extremely interesting character because his whole arc is him having this project to prove that he has free will, that such a thing exists at all. And to him, it means that you can go against God, right? So that God is not determining everything for you. And he thinks about what is the true way of proving it, and he arrives to the conclusion that the only way to fully prove it is for him to kill himself without actually having any reason to. Kirillov, in fact, is one of the, or maybe is the only happy character in Demons. He kind of unbothered, but he has this project that he believes in. And I mean, spoilers, in the end, he does, it's a question. Does he prove it or not? But he does kill himself absolutely without any reason. This is admittedly a very unorthodox view of considering whether we have the free will, but just to add to sort of the polyphonic conversation that's going on.
Yeah, and I think, we could talk about all these different sciences, and I think Awee does that in a way that we would not be able to approach. However, what you're talking about is really interesting because this is kind of like a theological, but also a philosophical way of approaching what free will is and what it pertains.
Yeah,
and I think that what Awee is clearly showing is this happens in science. So science are all talking on their own islands and they're not communicating anymore. So Husserl is trying to find a unifying factor. First philosophy, the grounds on which everything can be built.
Yeah.
And from that point, we continue with science, but we just know what we're talking about. Everyone has the same language,
right?
The same foundation.
We've raised awareness.
However, as we will see in the coming weeks, Husserl's philosophy, Husserl's phenomenology, also continued in very different tensions. We will see this with Heidegger, Sartre.
Yeah.
In this way, as we've already seen with Kierkegaard's dread, sometimes it can happen that philosophy gets a bit detached from the real world. And I've had this experience myself because I found what Kierkegaard wrote and what Heidegger wrote, that will be treated in the future, on dread and anxiety, I found beautiful, absolutely fascinating and inspiring and life-changing, maybe even. But then someone who has a depression can become kind of someone who understands dread and someone who understands anxiety. And you become like a little less empathetic towards people. Like really like, I'm depressed. Oh, good.
You're getting it. You're getting it, man.
You're seeing the full possibilities. Like you're experiencing possibility itself. And someone like, no, I cannot get out of that. Like, and I think this is, Awee is always really kind about this in his lectures, and really kind about the possibilities of this philosophy, without making it the answer for everyone, which I think is the only way to do phenomenology. And he does this in a beautiful way, but I think this is a risk for people who get too enthusiastic with what they learn about. And I'm one of those people. Like in my first year, I maybe even started to idealize being depressed a little bit, which is also a form of, well, not really accepting your position and trying to make it what this is, the aesthetic, which we talked about with Kierkegaard.
Doing it away. I think it's very important what you're saying. So far, we've really been encouraging the listener to dive head in, and I think now is a good way that this warning is being brought up. Do dive head first, but remember that we are not talking about eternal truths, because allegedly there is no such thing.
Yeah.
And
even if you find the truth as a base, that does not become everything else.
Yeah.
It can be built on that. And that is a beautiful thought.
Stay humble and kind.
Disintegration of the scientific world, Husserl says. There is no unifying principle anymore. This unifying principle used to be philosophy. Philosophy is proclaimed to be the mother of all sciences. You can find it in all the handbooks. Philosophy is the mother of all sciences, the queen of all sciences. This was a traditional task of philosophy, to be a unifying discipline. Philosophy keeps all these different perspectives, you might call them perspectives, they don't acknowledge themselves as perspectives, together, brings them into a coherence or even finds a foundation. And now, so this alienation is the first worrisome development, but a second worrisome development is that science have no real meaning for the lives we live. Science is value-free. Science, I already said, doesn't have anything to do with the meaning of life. There is no scientific research into the meaning of life. There may be scientific research into people looking for the meaning of life and then concluding that these people have a problem with depression or they should better become religious or whatever. But science as such is value-free, which also generates what Husserl called a moral vacuum. A scientific world is a nihilistic world that lives in a moral vacuum. Scientists will not give answers to moral questions. They never will. This is the merit of science, But it is also something we have to realize if we look at what is happening today. And Husserl warned, and he wrote The Crisis of European Science in 1936, that irrational movements will easily arise if science is the only thing we do. 1936. This is the year that Nazism really took over Germany, where Husserl was a Jewish professor. So this is a problem that Husserl, we're only talking about the problems, Husserl, so we're going to talk about solutions immediately after the break. But even us today, we can realize that this idea of Husserl, that science, we saw it in the COVID pandemic, we see it now, we see what we call now irrational movements, populism. Populism is today's, I wouldn't compare it with Nazism at all, don't get me wrong. But it's the idea that you don't trust anything anymore. There's only alienation between the sciences. There's no morality anymore. So there's populism, opinions, only opinions going around in a nihilistic world. So there's for Husserl, there's much at stake. Much at stake. This is not just a philosopher saying, all these traditions of metaphysics have failed. I can do better. That's what he says. That's what he says. He says much more. There's something like a revolutionary attempt to really, really find a better world. So just enjoy a break, and then we're going to look for that better world.